So we wanted to take some time to talk about Timeboost, which is a research result coming from the Offchain Labs research team. And if you're a developer on Arbitrum, if you're a developer on Arbitrum 1, this may affect how you think about the way that the chain operates. If you're a developer who's developing, say, an Orbit chain or some other Arbitrum technology chain, then Timeboost will give you another option in how your chain is operated. So we're going to go through a presentation about what Timeboost is and what its implications are. And then we'll leave some time for questions and answers and discussion at the end, wrapping up at the bottom of the hour. So next slide, please. Okay, so just a reminder of how L2 or indeed L3 chains operate and the role of the sequencer. Basically, the role of the sequencer is to take in transactions sent in by users and to output a feed of transactions, the sequencer feed that says which transactions are going to be executed by that Arbitrum chain and in what order. So that sequencer feed is published by the sequencer as a feed. And then it also, once enough transactions have been sequenced, the batch poster will take those transactions and batch them and compress them and post them onto Ethereum so that they have finality. So the sequencer's job is bring in transactions and then put out an ordered list of transactions. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so one question people sometimes ask about how the sequencer works is around how does the sequencer decide in what order to put these transactions out? And some people say, well, why don't you just do this the way Ethereum does it? Well, the answer there is, well, it's a little bit long and complicated, but basically an L2 or L3 differs from Ethereum in a bunch of really important ways that matter here. For one thing, in an L2, the sequencer is a separate component from the execution and settlement part, which is not the case on Ethereum. L2s have much faster block time, 48x faster on Arbitrum 1. They have a private mempool. They have a much lower cost structure. And in general, there are more choices in how to design an L2. So really thinking about how this should work on L2, we start by thinking about how the L1 does it, but then we look for ways to do better by taking advantage of the advantages that Arbitrum does have. Next slide, please. Right. So in figuring out how to order the transactions that come out of the sequencer, there are basically four goals that we have heard in talking to the community and developers. The first one is low latency. When a user submits a transaction, that transaction should find its way into the feed as fast as possible so users get a really nice fast response time. The second is low cost of operation. Ultimately, the cost of operating the sequencer needs to be paid for by the chain's fees. And so we want that to be cheap so that fees can be low. Third is the combination of resisting front running. That is, if you submit a transaction, you don't want there to be some party who looks at your transaction and then figures out how to exploit it by putting another transaction in front of it. We want to prevent front running, but we also would look for a way to capture revenue from MEV. That is, cases where there are parties out there who are doing things like arbitrage that are profitable for them, and they care a lot about transaction ordering. And it would be nice if the chain could capture some of the revenue that those arbitrageurs and other high-frequency traders are generating. And then finally, don't build in centralization. Don't choose an architecture that only works in a centralized setting. Next slide, please. Okay, so the current sequencing policy followed by all Arbitrum chains that exist today is first come, first served, which is really simple. Transactions get executed, they get put into the sequence in the order that they arrived. And this is a really nice policy in a bunch of ways. It has the lowest possible latency because as soon as a transaction arrives at the sequencer, it can be put into the output sequence. It has low cost because it's simple. The sequencer doesn't need to hold a lot of transactions at the same time. You protect against front running because the sequencer is usually the only one who knows what your transaction is, and the sequencer is just trusted not to front run, but there's no capture of that MEV revenue. So this is not generating any revenue for the chain. Currently, there's a trusted centralized sequencer, but this can be decentralized in the future, and there's ongoing discussions about that. So that's what the current sequencing policy is on every Arbitrum chain. Next slide, please. So our research team has developed another policy that we call Timeboost that we want to propose for use on any Arbitrum chain. So the Arbitrum DAO could decide whether or not to adopt Timeboost on Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum Nova, and the administrators or owners of app chains could make their own decisions. Here's what Timeboost is. The idea is that the sequencer is going to make a block every roughly half a second. When a transaction gets submitted, and that block has a bunch of transactions in it. When you submit a transaction to the sequencer, you have the option of attaching a bid for it. That basically what you're saying is, I want my transaction to be at the beginning of the block or close to the beginning of the block, and here's how much I'm willing to pay to get an advantageous position within the block. So if you're a high frequency trader, then you might be interested in submitting a bid. Within a block, the sequencer will sort transactions by bid. So the highest bidding transaction is first in the block, the second highest bidding transaction is second in the block, and so on. All the transactions are included, assuming they're valid. So the bid is not bidding to be included on the chain. Everyone gets included. The bid is bidding for position. Now, the transaction, when it runs, if it made a bid, it pays an extra fee, which is its bid multiplied by its gas used. So its bid is essentially a markup that it's willing to pay on the gas it's using on chain, like the priority fee on Ethereum. What we expect is that regular users will bid zero. Regular users should be satisfied to have their transaction within the first block, but it's really only the MEV racers, the high frequency traders, would bid against each other for position. And then that revenue from the bids is collected by the chain in the form of fees. And so it would go where fee revenue of the chain naturally goes, which is, in the case of Arbitrum 1 and Nova, into the DAO treasury, minus whatever is paid to the sequencer to cover its operation. Next slide, please. So it's pretty easy to implement this in a centralized way. You just have the centralized trusted sequencer, which maintains a private mempool, and it just does what I described on the previous slide. So we'll skip past this one, go to the next slide. We've also talked, and we're working in a research collaboration with the team at Espresso Systems to build a decentralized implementation of Timeboost. So here, instead of having a centralized committee, in centralized sequencer, you instead have a committee chosen by the DAO or acceptable to the DAO on Arbitrum 1, which and you trust that the majority of that committee or a supermajority is honest. And then basically the committee just collectively does what I described as the Timeboost algorithm before. Maybe and you can optionally add a decryption stage so people can submit encrypted transactions which only get decrypted after it's too late to front run them, to get even stronger front running protection. And as I said, we're working with the Espresso Systems team to develop an implementation of the decentralized version. Next slide, please. So let me hand off to Akaki, who is our economics and mechanism design expert, to talk about what are the economic implications of this.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Arbitrum Day. So I will talk about economic properties of the proposal. And first, let me go through the examples that we analyze through the proposal. So the example that we have is classic backrunning arbitrage opportunity. So there are multiple searchers that want to get the reward for the for their arbitrage opportunity, and the assumption is that the very first one gets all the reward. Okay, so then the proposal actually implements the sealed bid all pay auction and its first price, because the first one is the one that gets all the reward, but everyone pays. So that explains what is all pay part of it. And it's sealed bid because none of them can see what others are bidding only in case of centralized sequencer sees it. So big advantage of this proposal is that if there are multiple independent arbitrage opportunities and the first transaction wins a reward, then we get multiple separate sealed bid all pay auctions. And it doesn't make sense for searchers to combine two different transactions in one and bid for that, because bidding is happening per gas, and one low value transaction doesn't compensate for high value transaction. Only if they have almost the same valuation and size, then maybe it makes sense to bid together. Okay, so let me go through the properties. First property is actually our initial motivation, that searchers or arbitrage takers reduce their investment in the latency improvement, so that all the investment they make to win the races doesn't go to third parties but goes to the protocol itself. And that is achieved because at least you can think about it as some of the parts of their budget goes to bidding, but we have much more comprehensive analysis of that. Second property is that smaller players have chance to win independently, so they don't need to team up with anyone. So as I said on the previous slide, it doesn't make sense to combine two different valuation transactions. And if there is some smaller player that has high value transaction, it will win over large player who has maybe a lot of transactions, but valuation for each of them is a bit less, because it doesn't make sense to combine transactions. So third property that is good from social welfare perspective is that a slot, so the winning transaction, is allocated to the highest value player. And that is not the case with the first come first serve, because someone who has the highest latency would always win the race, and it's not necessarily the case that this person or bot has the highest valuation for the arbitrage. So fourth property is that decision on bidding or how much to invest is happening interim instead of ex ante. So in case of first come first serve, players need to invest in the latency much in advance, so they cannot decide to have fast latency once they see the opportunity. Okay, so of course the longer block time yields more revenue per block, but we have other considerations as well. That's why we don't want them to be too long, because that increases the latency. Of course, we still want to accept bundles, so that's good for the user experience. For example, also for the arbitrage seekers, because some arbitrage opportunities require that multiple transactions are in the same bundle, and they will be executed in the same block, so there is no splitting. So once the bundle makes in the block, then it will be executed in that block, and also the transactions in the bundle will be executed one by one consecutively. So a bit about implementation. Ed already mentioned that it's collected by the chain, and then the chain decides what to do with the revenue, and it is cheap and convenient because all the infrastructure is already there. So at the moment, Arbitrum sequencer doesn't collect the priority fees with the same transaction type as Ethereum has. There is one feature, priority fees, because they put large priority fees there. So to collect the bits in this proposal, we would introduce new transaction type, which has this new field. And yeah, as I mentioned, we also support bundles. That's all from me. Thank you for your attention. We are looking for your questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ed and Akaki. So we open the floor now for questions from the audience. So we have one I can see in the chat. Will Arbitrum explore ZK?
Will Arbitrum explore ZK? I think there are a bunch of researchers in the ecosystem who are looking at ZK technology and trying to evaluate a couple of things. One is, what would it take for Arbitrum technologies to make available a sort of end-to-end ZK proof instead of the optimistic rollup? Could Arbitrum turn into a ZK rollup? And the basic answer to that is, well, if there is a ZK proving technology that is fast enough and cheap enough and scalable enough, it certainly could. There's nothing about the architecture of Arbitrum which is locked into optimistic. That said, I at least don't see a ZK technology today that can operate at the scale and cost that Arbitrum chains expect. So I don't think that is likely to happen soon, but obviously, technology sometimes surprises us. The other thing is there a way that ZK technology could play a role in the Arbitrum protocol and not be the whole protocol? And there's also some interesting research going on there. So for example, it looks like it's possible to use ZK proving to substitute for the transactions in to signatures on transactions. So the idea is that the batches of data from transactions get posted onto Ethereum every 30 to 45 seconds, say on Arbitrum 1. And that data is compressed. But after compression, a big piece of what's left over is the signatures that users have put on transactions. Those signatures are not compressible. So what if, instead of actually including every single transaction, the signature on every single transaction, if you have a batch of like 1,000 transactions, could you just ZK prove that the prover knows signatures on all of those transactions? And then instead of attaching all of the 1,000 signatures, you just attach this one ZK proof. That's much smaller. It could save on the data footprint, save money. That's an example of ways that you can use ZK as a tool inside the protocol rather than sort of needing to end-to-end prove all of the computation. So there's folks in the Arbitrum research community working on all of that kind of stuff. So thanks for the question.
The other question is, what is the main purpose of Arbitrum Stylus, which we have another session coming up right after this one, which is all about Stylus. So I'm not sure if Ed, do you have anything to say, or do we want to defer? Yeah. All right.
I have a little bit to say. I mean, the main thing is that we have an amazing engineering team who has been working on Stylus, and you're going to hear about Stylus from them. I just want to say, though, that I think Stylus is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in the blockchain space. It's a really amazing technology. I think it'll be a big game changer. But I'm not going to try to give a technical dissertation on Stylus, because that's coming right up from the folks who brought Stylus to us.
So the next question is, it's a pretty long one. So how will Arbitrum maintain its dominant position in Ethereum's layer 2 landscape, especially given the emergence of competent zero-knowledge projects? While Arbitrum's technology is impressive, there is a significant concern regarding its 5 to 7 day challenge period and the time taken for confirmation when users wish to bridge faster from the chain.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I think Arbitrum is doing as well as it is among Arbitrum 1, among the L2s, because it delivers value to people. Arbitrum has a combination of low prices, reliability, a very fast latency. And I don't think that other chains are able to duplicate that value proposition. So at the end of the day, I don't think that's going to change. And I don't think the ZK projects, the ZK rollup projects that are coming onto the market can match that particular combination of features. The question did mention the challenge period. Now, the challenge period almost never matters to end users in practice, because most transactions, Arbitrum still offers finality at close to the minimum time that any layer 2 can. That is, the minimum time any layer 2 can have for finality is Ethereum finality, because nothing is final until it's recorded on Ethereum. And an Ethereum, recording something on Ethereum, when you put something on Ethereum, it takes 12 to 19 minutes to have finality there. Arbitrum gets finality at about that time. So the challenge period really only applies when someone is doing a withdrawal of a non-fungible asset, which does happen, but it's not a super prominent use case. The other thing I would say is that although the challenge period currently is long, we have ongoing research about how to make it much shorter while maintaining security. And you could look for a post that I made on the ETH Research Forum some months back about reducing the challenge times in rollups.
Amazing, thank you, Ed. We have another question, which I believe we can ask the Stylus team, but and in any case, does Arbitrum support running Golang smart contracts compiled to WASM?
Yes, in Stylus.
Right. So yeah, the other question is, what is the great virtue of Arbitrum?
So I think Arbitrum offers, I would say, a few things. There's the answer about technology, and there's the answer about community. And I think Arbitrum is great on both bounds. When it comes to community, I think the Arbitrum community is really unmatched in terms of the energy, in terms of the technical creativity, in terms of the teamwork and the spirit that we see in the community. The community is really one of the biggest assets of the entire Ethereum ecosystem. Without the community, none of this would be worth anything. But you can also look at it from a technical standpoint. What is the value proposition that Arbitrum delivers? I think I would say several things. If you look at, say, the main Arbitrum 1 chain, the flagship chain that is run and owned by the DAO, it offers a really, I think, unique combination of low cost, very fast response time, reliability, and scale. That combination has been really valuable to people. The Arbitrum technology is also configurable, right? You see the Arbitrum Nova chain, which has a different data availability model. All data availability, that's a hot thing right now. Nova delivered it almost a year and a half ago on mainnet. And that offers a nice combination of even lower cost with alternate data availability. And then, of course, all the activity going on around Orbit chains and people launching their own customized Arbitrum chains. In terms of the ability to launch your own chain and customize it and actually deliver that technical value to people, I think Arbitrum is really unique. I mean, I'm biased on this. I've been all in on Arbitrum for years now. But I think that's really it. It's really the community, and it's really the ability to deliver those technical advantages consistently.
Amazing, thank you. And we have one last question, which is not really Timeboost related. Is, do you mind speaking to the merits of Arbitrum Orbit versus Polygon and OP Stack, and maybe Traction too? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's a later session on Orbit in this.
There is, yeah.
Okay. So let me refer you forward to the Orbit day, which again, I'm not the leading expert on Orbit. But here's the thing about Orbit. I think Orbit, like the Arbitrum stack from the beginning, has really focused on delivering value to people, right? It's easy to make promises. It's easy. You can deliver a lot of features on PowerPoint, but when you have to deliver them in real software, I think that can be challenging. I think Orbit offers a really great combination of the reliability and security that Arbitrum provides, right? The only optimistic rollup that has a actually working fraud-proof security mechanism. You can have that yourself on your own chain out of the box. Also, customizability. Orbit gives you the ability to customize your own chain. You can operate at a very low cost structure if you're building an L3. L3s have lower cost structure than say building your own L2. So there's a lot of advantage to doing that, although there are L2 opportunities available as well.